The evening had already settled into silence when the knock came. Sharp and unexpected, cutting through the calm of Emma Carter's small suburban home. She had just finished washing the dishes, the kitchen lights warm against the growing darkness. Outside, and for a brief moment she considered ignoring it, thinking it might be a delivery at the wrong address or a neighbor needing a quick favor. Emma had learned to value quiet since her divorce, fielding routines that kept her steady and protected her heart from surprises. Still, something about the knock felt different, firmer but not rushed, as if whoever stood on the porch hoped she would answer. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door, her mind already preparing polite excuses in case she wanted to keep the evening to herself. When she opened it, she found Daniel Brooks standing there, her neighbor from across the street, holding a small paper bag and wearing a gentle smile that looked both familiar and slightly nervous. Daniel was the kind of neighbor everyone liked, dependable and kind, the one who waved every morning and helped shovel snow without being asked during long winters. Emma knew him well enough to exchange friendly conversations, but not well enough to expect him at her door after sunset. He lifted the bag slightly and said he had baked too much and thought she might enjoy some fresh bread. His voice calm but careful, as if he didn't want to intrude. Emma felt a brief hesitation, the quiet part of her reminding her how easy it was to let people back into her space, yet another part of her, one she had ignored for too long, welcomed the warmth of human company. She thanked him and stepped aside, inviting him in, telling herself this was harmless. It's just a neighborly moment, nothing more. As Daniel entered, the house seemed to react, the stillness shifting, the air filling with a presence Emma hadn't realized she missed. He glanced around politely, his eyes landing on small details. The bookshelf by the wall, the neat sofa, the framed photo on the hallway table that Emma sometimes forgot was there. It was an old wedding photo, not displayed proudly, but not hidden either, a quiet reminder of a chapter that had ended. Daniel's gaze paused there just a second longer than necessary, and Emma noticed, feeling a small tightening in her chest. She moved quickly, leading him into the living room, offering coffee without asking if he wanted it, filling the silence with practiced ease. They sat across from each other, the paper bag between them like an excuse for the visit, steam rising from their cups as the evening grew darker outside. Daniel spoke about small things at first, about work, about a repair he was planning on his house, his words steady but his posture slightly tense. Emma responded easily, though her thoughts wandered, aware of the strange energy in the room, the feeling that this visit carried more weight than it should. She noticed how Daniel listened closely, not interrupting, not checking his phone, giving her attention she hadn't realized she missed. It made her aware of how long it had been since anyone had come into her home simply to share time. As the minutes passed, the conversation began to slow, not from boredom, but from something unspoken, building beneath it. Emma felt it in the way Daniel's hands rested tightly around his mug, in the way he seemed to search for words, then change direction. Outside, a car passed, headlights briefly lighting the room, and Emma suddenly became aware of how quiet the house was, how personal the moment felt. Daniel shifted in his seat and let out a small breath, as if he had been holding it since he arrived. He looked at Emma with an expression that surprised her, not bold or confident, but honest and slightly afraid. He said he almost hadn't come tonight, that he debated turning back more than once before reaching her door. Emma asked why, her voice soft but curious, and Daniel hesitated again, choosing his words carefully. He said that being her neighbor had never been as simple as it appeared, that there were things he noticed, moments he remembered, conversations that stayed with him longer than they should have. Emma felt her heart beat faster, a mix of confusion and awareness washing over her as she realized this visit was no accident. She thought about the past 2 years, about how she had rebuilt herself quietly, assuming everyone around her saw only the surface, a calm woman who had moved on. Hearing Daniel speak made her wonder if someone had seen more, if someone had noticed the loneliness she hid so well. The room seemed to close in slightly, Not in a frightening way, but in a way that demanded attention, demanded honesty. Daniel stood up and walked a few steps toward the window, staring out at the quiet street they both lived on. The same street where their paths crossed daily without meaning, until now. He spoke softly, saying there were things he had carried. For a long time, things he wasn't sure he should share. And Emma realized this friendly visit had already taken a turn she could not ignore. She watched him from across the room, feeling the weight of his words before he even finished speaking. Sensing that whatever came next would change the way she saw him. And maybe even the way she saw herself. And as the silence stretched between them, Emma understood that the knock at her door had opened more than just an evening conversation. It had opened a moment she could never fully undo. The room was quiet, yet the silence carried more weight than any words could, stretching between Emma and Daniel like a thread neither dared to cut. After the initial pleasantries, the conversation slowed. But not in awkwardness. It slowed in that way that made her aware of every gesture, every glance, and every pause. Daniel's hands rested around his coffee cup, gripping it lightly as if it were an anchor, his eyes occasionally flicking to the old wedding photo on the wall, lingering on the memory it captured. Emma noticed, but did not comment. Instead, she focused on him, trying to read what he was thinking. The small tension in his shoulders, the way he cleared his throat more than once before speaking. They spoke at first about ordinary things books she had recently borrowed from the library, small repair Daniel was planning on his porch, neighborhood news, but each topic seemed to mask a larger question, a hidden meaning neither of them wanted to address directly. Emma felt a flutter of curiosity, a pull she had long resisted, as though the room itself was urging her to pay attention. She had grown accustomed to solitude, 2 evenings that passed without surprise, but now, sitting across from Daniel, she realized how much she had missed the quiet intimacy of shared company. Daniel's voice was steady but soft, and every now and then his gaze would lift to meet hers with an intensity that made her heart race unexpectedly. He spoke carefully, choosing words that revealed nothing directly, yet hinted at everything, as if testing the water before revealing the full truth. Emma listened, her own responses measured, polite, yet she felt her pulse quicken with each small confession he offered. There was a sense that something unspoken hovered between them, a weight of truth that neither was willing to name. And it made every glance, every smile, every hesitant word feel charged with meaning. The longer they sat, the more Emma realized that the night had shifted. What began as a simple neighborly visit had evolved into something much more complicated, something she had not anticipated. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring for a moment out the window at the streetlights, casting soft glows across the quiet road. Then turned his attention back to her, his eyes revealing a mixture of hesitation and longing. "I almost didn't come tonight," he said quietly, breaking the tension, his voice so low she almost missed it. Emma tilted her head, sensing that this sentence was the key to what he had been holding inside all along. "Why not?" she asked softly, her curiosity overcoming the calm surface she had tried to maintain. Daniel paused, his gaze dropping to his coffee cup before meeting hers again. "Because being your neighbor, it has never been simple," he admitted, his words carrying a weight that made Emma lean forward slightly, wanting to understand, but also fearing the depths of what he might reveal. He spoke about the quiet observations he had made over the years. The moments he had noticed when she laughed alone in her garden, or when she paused at the mailbox in the mornings, caught in thought. His voice trembled slightly as he continued, confessing that he had grown accustomed to caring, to noticing her small routines, and that he had often wondered if it was his place to care, or if he should simply keep his distance. Emma's heart began to beat faster, a mixture of surprise and awareness washing over her as she realized that Daniel's presence had always carried more than simple friendliness. She thought about the years since her divorce, the careful walls she had built around herself, and the rare moments when someone had actually seen her without judgment, without expectation. Daniel's gaze softened, and he shifted in his seat. Leaning slightly forward, the words he spoke next, filling the room with an almost tangible tension. I kept telling myself I couldn't say anything, that I had to respect your space, your healing. But tonight I realized that if I didn't speak, I might never have the chance again. Emma swallowed, feeling a lump in her throat, her mind racing as she tried to keep her emotions in check. She had always noticed Daniel's kindness, his attentiveness, but she had never imagined that it carried such depth, such careful consideration. The conversation seemed to stretch and contract. Moments of silence, punctuating confessions. And Emma became acutely aware of how much she wanted to hear, how much she wanted to understand what Daniel had held back for so long. He stood slowly, walking to the window and looking out at the quiet street they both shared, as if gathering courage. "There's something I need to tell you," he said finally, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of truth. "And once I do, things might feel different, maybe even strange. I can't leave without it." Emma watched him, her heart pounding, a mixture of anticipation and fear twisting inside her. She understood immediately that whatever he was about to reveal would change the dynamic between them. That a single sentence could shift the calmness of this night into something charged with emotion and possibility. Daniel's eyes returned to hers, steady and honest, and Emma felt a shiver of recognition. He was serious. He was sincere, and this was no longer a casual visit. She had opened the door to a neighbor. But now she was faced with a man who carried feelings that had been waiting for the right moment. Feelings that had been restrained for years, and she sensed that everything they had known about each other was about to transform. Her mind raced with questions, but her instincts told her to wait, to listen, to let the moment unfold naturally. The room felt smaller, warmer, charged with the unspoken, and Emma realized with a quiet thrill that she was standing on the edge of a moment she could never forget. Daniel's words, held back for so long, now hovered in the air between them, and Emma felt the thrill and fear of possibility, knowing that the night, which began with a simple knock and a gesture of neighborly kindness, was moving into territory she had never anticipated. A territory full of honesty, longing, and quiet. Revelation. A territory that promised to shift her world forever. Daniel took a slow, steadying breath, as if bracing himself for a fall, and Emma watched him, sensing that what he was about to say carried the weight of months, maybe years, of hesitation and hidden emotion. He moved closer to the window, hands lightly resting on the sill, staring out at the quiet street, the soft glow of the streetlights reflecting in his eyes. Emma stayed seated, heart racing, aware that the moment had shifted. This was no longer a simple neighborly visit, no casual conversation about the day or borrowed books. This was something deeper, raw in its honesty and vulnerability. "I've been offered a job in another city," Daniel said, his voice calm but with an edge of tension. "And I leave in 2 weeks." Emma blinked, caught off guard, feeling a sudden pull of unease and longing she hadn't expected. She had prepared herself for polite conversation, for small kindnesses, for a quiet evening. But not for this Daniel leaving without knowing how she felt. Leaving without understanding the unspoken connection that had built up between them, over countless small moments. Her mind spun, trying to process his words while her heart seemed to beat faster with each passing second. Realizing that what she felt for him was more complicated than she had admitted even to herself. Daniel turned slightly, meeting her gaze, and in that look was an honesty that made her stomach twist. "I didn't tell anyone," he said, "because I was unsure if I could leave without saying something that has stayed inside me far too long." Emma's hands tightened around her mug, the warmth inside it barely grounding her in the sudden storm of emotion she felt. She listened, silently, as he took a few steps closer, stopping just short of the chair she sat on, his eyes never leaving hers. "The truth is, Emma," he said quietly, "my kindness toward you was never just neighborly. I've cared for you more than I should have, in ways I tried to hide, in ways I hoped you would never notice until the time was right." Emma's chest tightened, a mixture of surprise, fear, and hope flooding her senses. She had always noticed Daniel, yes, in small ways, the way he would clear snow from her sidewalk without being asked, the way he would stop to check on her garden, the small smiles that seemed meant only for her, but she had never imagined this depth, this careful thought behind every small gesture. He continued, his voice low and steady. "I waited because I wanted to respect your healing, because I knew you were rebuilding your life. And I didn't want to pressure you. But tonight, knowing I might leave, I can't keep it in any longer." Emma felt her mind and heart race together, the emotions too intense to fully comprehend. The quiet room around them seeming to shrink as the truth of his confession filled every corner. She realized how much she had underestimated the subtle signs, how much she had overlooked the attention and care he had shown, mistaking it for simple neighborliness when it had been so much more. Daniel's gaze softened, almost painfully tender, and he stepped back slightly, as if giving her space, while simultaneously drawing her in with the honesty in his eyes. "I understand if this is sudden," he said, "if it changes everything, but I had to tell you before I leave. Couldn't let the opportunity pass, not knowing whether you felt even a fraction of what I've carried all this time." Emma's lips parted, words caught somewhere between surprise and hope, as she tried to understand what she felt herself. She realized that this moment, this confession, was more than just a declaration of feelings, was a chance, a turning point, a fragile bridge between the loneliness she had lived with and the possibility of connection she had long denied herself. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of nervousness crossing his face as he waited for her response, and Emma recognized the courage it must have taken to speak these words. The vulnerability he had exposed without knowing what she would do. She felt a sudden warmth, not just from the presence of another person, but from the clarity of honesty, the rare and fragile kind that makes hearts race and minds whirl with possibility. For a moment, neither spoke. The room was filled with a quiet intensity, a shared understanding that something profound had just been offered. Something that required acknowledgement, reflection, and courage to accept. Emma realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. That this moment was about feeling, about recognition, about the simple truth that someone had cared for her deeply all along. And that in itself was enough to change the course of the evening, maybe even her life. Daniel's words lingered in the air, filling the spaces between them, and she felt the tension of longing and uncertainty settle into a quiet anticipation, a subtle shift that promised more, a future that could be different if she chose to embrace it. She looked at him, really looked, noticing the small lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he breathed carefully, the hope that trembled faintly in his posture. And in that moment, she felt a connection that transcended casual friendship, a bridge of trust and care built over countless unnoticed moments. Daniel stepped a little closer again, hesitant but steady, as if measuring the right distance. The right words, the right gesture to honor both their past and the unknown that lay ahead. Emma understood instinctively that the choice wasn't just his, was theirs together, a silent invitation to explore feelings neither had expressed openly until now. Her hands relaxed slightly, her pulse still racing, and she found herself leaning forward, drawn into the gravity of the moment. Aware that the evening had moved past ordinary conversations and polite gestures into something raw, real, and transformative, Daniel spoke again, softly, almost as if speaking to himself as much as to her. "I don't want to leave with regrets. I couldn't bear it if I never told you what you mean to me." Emma's breath caught, the simple honesty overwhelming her, and she felt a surge of emotion that was equal parts fear and hope, realizing that this night, this revelation, had shifted everything she thought she knew about their relationship, about the possibilities still waiting for her. Think about the fragile yet powerful bond that had always existed between them. The room seemed to hold its breath, the clock ticking unnoticed as Emma sat there, understanding that the next words, the next movement would decide how their story unfolded. That the confession Daniel had just shared was both an ending and a beginning, and that in the quiet intensity of that living room, surrounded by shadows and soft lamplight, their lives had changed forever. The moment hung between them, heavy yet delicate, as if the air itself had paused to listen. Emma sat in her chair, her hands still wrapped loosely around her coffee cup. And Daniel stood by the window, the quiet glow of the streetlights casting a soft halo around him, highlighting the vulnerability she had never seen in him before. They did not speak immediately, letting the intensity of the confession settle, letting the room itself absorb the weight of what had just been shared. Emma's mind raced, replaying every word, every gesture, every small moment of kindness Daniel had offered over the years, realizing that they had all led to this one instant. This intersection of honesty, longing, and possibility. She could feel her heart beating fast, her emotions swirling between surprise, relief, and an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the evening's chill. Daniel finally took a step closer, cautious yet purposeful, as if testing the boundaries of what was allowed, what was appropriate, and what was inevitable. "I didn't want to pressure you," he said softly. "And I understand if this changes things, or if it's too much. I just couldn't leave without being honest." Emma nodded, words catching in her throat, a mixture of awe and gratitude making her pulse quicken. She realized that this honesty was a gift, and the courage it had taken for Daniel to speak it aloud made her feel seen in a way she hadn't been for a long time. They began to talk again, slowly, tentatively, not about romance or expectations, but about themselves, their lives, the fears they carried, and the small victories that had marked the years since her divorce. The conversation flowed naturally, the tension easing slightly as they shared memories and small truths, learning more about each other in a single evening than they might have in months of casual interactions. Emma found herself laughing softly at his humor, marveling at how comfortable and safe she felt even in the midst of such raw emotion. Daniel, too, seemed lighter, more relaxed, though the vulnerability remained, a constant reminder of the weight of honesty he had carried. Time seemed to slip away unnoticed, the hours blending as they moved between laughter, reflection, and quiet contemplation. Outside, the street was dark and still, the occasional passing car or distant dog bark punctuating the night. Yet inside, their small living room felt alive, charged with a sense of connection that neither could deny. As the night deepened, Daniel realized it was time to leave, the thought of the move still looming over him, a reminder of the limited window they had. He stood at the door, pausing, as if gathering the courage for one last act of bravery, one last gesture that might change the course of what had begun in honesty and understanding. Emma followed him, drawn to the doorway, the warmth of the house clashing with the cool night air beyond. Their eyes met, steady, holding a silent dialogue of hope, curiosity, and the faint fear of uncertainty. "Before I go," Emma said, her voice soft but firm, "maybe we could start small. It's dinner, just the two of us. Nothing complicated, just time together." Daniel's eyes brightened, a small, relieved smile spreading across his face, and he nodded. "I'd like that," he said, his voice carrying the lightness of someone unburdened. Someone finally able to express the feelings he had kept hidden. The tension that had filled the evening seemed to dissolve slightly, replaced with anticipation and possibility. They stepped back into the living room briefly, gathering their things. The paper bag of bread, now an afterthought, a symbol of the casual beginning that had led to profound revelation. The air between them was lighter now, yet charged with potential. A quiet electricity that hinted at future moments waiting to be discovered. When Daniel finally opened the door, the cool night air rushed in, bringing with it the sounds and scents of the quiet neighborhood, but the warmth inside Emma's home remained, anchored in the honesty they had shared. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second, then looked at her eyes, steady and sincere, and whispered, "Thank you, Emma, for listening, for trusting, for letting me be honest." Emma felt a lump in her throat, nodding silently, her heart full of emotion, realizing that gratitude and anticipation could coexist so perfectly. As Daniel stepped out into the night, she closed the door slowly, leaning against it, the quiet click echoing in the empty hallway. Her mind swirled with thoughts of what had happened, replaying the honesty, the courage, and the unspoken connection they had shared. A simple neighborly visit had transformed into a night of revelation, opening a door not just in her home, but in her heart. A door she hadn't realized she had kept closed for so long. Emma took a deep breath, letting the mixture of fear and excitement settle into a gentle thrill, knowing that the story of that evening was only beginning. She realized that the visit, the conversation, the confession had shifted everything. The possibility of something new, of shared moments and understanding, had become real, tangible, and within reach. She smiled softly to herself, heart racing, yet calm in the way that comes when hope is balanced with respect and honesty. Outside, Daniel walked down the quiet street, unaware of the exact impact his words had on her. Yet leaving behind a changed world, a living room now filled with the echo of truth and the soft promise of what could come. Emma leaned against the door a moment longer, feeling a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Her heart aware that the night had turned an ordinary evening into a beginning. A quiet but powerful start to a story neither of them could have predicted, a story of connection, care, and the kind of honesty that transforms lives. The night settled around her, but Emma felt awake in a way she hadn't in a long time, realizing that sometimes the most ordinary moments, a knock, a visit, a shared cup of coffee could carry the power to change everything. And she welcomed the future with a nervous, hopeful excitement she was ready to explore.